Trades in hockey are almost always about more than the sum of their parts. Every trade has a story behind it, and that's doubly true for the bad ones. In order to evaluate a bad trade, to really understand it, you need to consider all sides of what led to such a baffling managerial decision. Was it a contract dispute? Internal team strife? Or was it simply a bad bet? A redundant piece that goes on to win awards with their new franchise while all you can hope to win is a draft lottery. Whether it's driven by hubris, incompetence, or something else entirely, the end result of a bad trade tends to be the same. Your team suffers while the player you traded flourishes. With that in mind, it's time for a deep dive into some monumental blunders. Here are the worst NHL trades of the 21st century. Let's get some honorable mentions out of the way first, because there are plenty of trades that are bad enough while not necessarily being the worst. Lopsided one-for-one swaps like Erat for Forsberg or Larson for Hall, these were bad trades, but it's not like Washington or Edmonton really suffered for them. Sure, the Oilers had to watch Hall win a Hart Trophy, but the Devils were so bad he eventually demanded another trade. And as for Forsberg, he's an elite player for sure, but the Capitals still won a cup without him. But there's one team that, despite its success, has a bad habit of trading star players for spare parts. The Boston Bruins. We'll start with Joe Thornton. The Boston defense for sending him to San Jose was that it was a good hockey move because Boston wasn't going to win with him as a centerpiece. Sure, he won a Hart Trophy and turned mediocre line mates into 40 goal scorers, but he has 0 cups. And the Bruins won without him, right? Well, even if you believe this reasoning, it still doesn't excuse the bag of pucks Boston received in return. Likewise with Tyler Seguin, who apparently partied too hard, but not hard enough to keep him from being a point-per-game player in Dallas. And Dougie Hamilton, who was up to 40 points in 47 games as a defenseman before the 2020 season was halted. The pile of bodies Boston received for these 3 players never came close to equaling what they were worth on the ice. And it's fair to say, they should have done better. I do honestly think Boston would have more than 1 cup if they had hung on to even one of these 3 guys. So I guess thank you, Boston, for trading them all away. Then again, the Bruins could afford to play fast and loose with Seguin and Hamilton because they were the return for another budding star in a deal even worse than anything Boston has done. Too many words have already been said about the Phil Kessel trade. There's a Steve Dangle Trade Tree episode about it that I highly recommend. But I'll just say this. The Kessel trade was a disaster for Toronto for many reasons, but none of those reasons involved Kessel. When Kessel was a Leaf, he was the best player on the team by a country mile, and it's not on him that Brian Burke overpaid with unprotected draft picks to get him. That still makes the trade terrible, and it doesn't help that Kessel won 2 cups immediately after Toronto traded him away. But unlike the Bruins, the Leafs actually have something of value left from the pieces of that deal, so it's not the worst of the last 20 years. In fact, it's not even the worst trade between Toronto and Boston in that time. Good young goaltending was a priority for the Leafs at the 2005 draft. And after watching rivals Montreal select Carey Price, they picked Tuukka Rask 21st overall. But patience has never been a virtue for Toronto. And a young goaltender who was good now was worth whatever they had in the pipeline. Or so they thought. So John Ferguson Jr. got on the phone and called Boston, where Andrew Raycroft was 1 season removed from winning the Calder Trophy. It didn't seem to matter that Raycroft's most recent season was a train wreck. JFJ wanted him in a Leafs uniform and gave Rask to the Bruins in exchange. Raycroft lasted 2 disastrous seasons with the Leafs and bounced around the league for a few more years, while Rask won the Vezina Trophy in 2014 and has been the backbone of many Boston playoff runs. The part that makes this really sting? Rask was in Boston's net for all 3 times the Bruins eliminated Toronto from the playoffs over the last decade. The Leafs did that to themselves. It was 4-1. Moving on, the 2017 expansion draft made some teams panic over losing certain players, and a few of those teams managed to make a bad situation worse through trades. In their attempts to shield players from Vegas or shed a bad contract, teams often handed the Golden Knights assets more valuable than what they were trying to protect. And no team fell flat on its face harder than the Florida Panthers. Teams could choose between protecting 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie, or 8 skaters and 1 goalie, and the Panthers chose the latter in order to protect 4 defensemen: Keith Yandel, Aaron Ekblad, Alex Petrovic, and Mark Pysyk. Then they traded Riley Smith to Vegas and asked the Golden Knights to select Jonathan Marchessault. In exchange, they received a 2018 4th round pick. To summarize, instead of letting Vegas take one player, the Panthers gave away 2 top 6 forwards, and all they got in return was a late pick in the next year's draft. We could try to explain this as a salary dump, since Smith was earning $5 million per year and Marchessault was a season away from free agency. But that doesn't explain the urgency to move them at the expansion draft instead of waiting for a better offer. And it certainly doesn't explain the reason for protecting a depth defender like Petrovic at the expense of 2 impactful forwards. Vegas made their miraculous run to the finals in the first year with the help of a handful of Panthers cast-offs, including the coach Florida unceremoniously dumped on a street corner. Meanwhile, all Dale Talon could do was sit and watch as his legacy morphed from the man who built the Blackhawks dynasty into someone who got fleeced by George McPhee. Imagine getting fleeced by George McPhee. This is the GM who thought Martin Erat was worth Philip Forsberg. But none of these trades are the worst we've seen in the 21st century. None of the GMs I've mentioned so far have sunk to the depths of the horrible trades that come to mind when someone says the words Mike Milbury. The New York Islanders of the mid to late 90s were bad, which afforded them plenty of opportunities to stock their prospect cupboard. In 1996, they drafted Zdeno Chara. In 97, they drafted Roberto Luongo. They made 4 picks in the first round of 1999, the same year they acquired a young Olli Jokinen 2 years removed from being drafted 3rd overall. These players formed the future core of an Islanders team in an alternate universe where Milbury didn't exist. But in this reality, they were all gone by the 2001 offseason. It all started at the 2000 draft, where Milbury used the 1st overall pick to select goaltender Rick DiPietro. Before the end of the day, Luongo was dealt to Florida alongside Jokinen, a clear vote of confidence in DiPietro by Milbury. How did that go? Well, DiPietro stayed healthy for a few seasons, but spent most of his career on injured reserve, while Jokinen set franchise records with the Panthers, and Luongo is likely on his way to the Hall of Fame. The players the Islanders received in the trade, Mark Parrish and Oleg Kvasha, never made much of an impact. But that was just the warm-up for 2001, when Milbury decided it was time to land a superstar by the name of Alexei Yashin? Milbury wanted Yashin so badly, he wrote a blank check to Ottawa at the 2001 draft. The Senators walked away with Chara and the 2nd overall pick, which they used on Jason Spezza. Chara's on his way to a first ballot Hall of Fame induction, and Spezza has more than 900 career points, while Yashin, a 2-time 40 goal scorer in Ottawa, signed a massive 10-year contract extension with the Islanders, but faded into irrelevance before being bought out in 2007. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Just to follow up on Milbury, his front office career ended around the same time as Yashin's buyout. He now gets paid to talk about hockey on TV because life is a big joke and hockey is no different. Anyway, I hope you're doing well. If you like this video, hit that like button and maybe subscribe, or share your thoughts on bad trades in the comments. Have a good one, everyone.